Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional League, Dynasty League, PPR League, IDP League, even Daily Fantasy Football League. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
All right, and welcome to another edition of the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kenneth Gruenfelder, for another installment of the show. Thank you for joining me, and we got a lot to talk about on today's show. We're going to be going through some lists when it pertains to fantasy football, per usual. So for some of these segments, first one, we'll be doing the top QBs heading into the 2021 NFL season. And the next list, we'll be talking about the top 5 running backs that I believe are going to be the best in 2021 pertaining to fantasy football. And then we got, for the third segment, we'll be talking about the top 5 wide receivers for the 2021 NFL season. And then for the last segment, to conclude the show, we'll be talking about the top 5 fantasy performances from individual players in 2020. So let's start off with talking about the top 5 quarterbacks that I think are going to be the best in 2021. So at number 5 on this list, I have the quarterback for the Green Bay Packers, Aaron Rodgers. Now, Aaron Rodgers recently has been guest hosting on Jeopardy, and if you tuned in, he's actually been doing a pretty nice job at hosting Jeopardy, and he's been talking about maybe hosting Jeopardy at the same time as he is currently playing football, which I thought was pretty interesting. But that's just a little side note, really nothing to do with fantasy. But Aaron Rodgers will now be entering his 17th season in the NFL. Was the first pick in the first round draft pick for the Green Bay Packers back in 2005. Was the 24th overall pick. And this past season in 2020, played in all 16 games. He won his 3rd NFL MVP. And he was great when it came to fantasy. He did not disappoint. Put up 382 points when it comes to standard leagues. Had 48 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. He was incredible. And I think he's put himself back in the conversation as one of the top QBs in the NFL. In 2019, he was good. You know, his statistics were still pretty good. 26 touchdowns to 4 interceptions. Definitely had a good season in 2019, but definitely looked like the QB that we're accustomed to seeing in 2020. And I think he's going to continue to be a top QB, especially when it comes to fantasy. And I think one of the key things with the Packers is I think they have to draft another wide receiver. Give Aaron Rodgers another weapon. He's got Devontae Adams. They bring back Aaron Jones. The one other concern I have is the offensive line. David Bakhtiari, their left tackle, is coming back after tearing his ACL. And they did lose Corey Linsley, their center, in the offseason. So the offensive line is kind of going to be a little bit different going into next season. So hopefully Green Bay can maintain having a dominant offensive line like they did in 2020 to protect Aaron Rodgers, because that's a huge key, is protecting Aaron Rodgers and giving him a running game, because that's something that he hasn't had over the course of his Hall of Fame career. But like I said, I think he's still going to be a top QB in fantasy. I think he's a guy you definitely want to get and definitely put on your draft board for guys that you want to definitely get For me, though, when it comes to 2 QB leagues, I mean, there's better guys out there, and there's going to be better guys that I believe are going to outperform him this season when it comes to fantasy. And not to say that Aaron Rodgers is not going to be a top QB, because I believe he's going to be when it comes to fantasy. But he's got weapons around him. He's got the top wide receiver in the league, arguably, when you're talking about Devontae Adams. So I think Aaron Rodgers is going to continue to be productive, especially in fantasy. And especially, when you're talking about your drafts, you could definitely get him in the later rounds, like 8 or 9. Because, like I said, there's going to be better QBs out there that people are going to want to take. Now, last year, drafting, obviously a lot of people didn't expect Aaron Rodgers to have the year that he had. Because in 2019, he looked good, but he wasn't the Aaron Rodgers that we expected. And you could tell there was something that was a little bit off. But I think a lot of that had to do with the new scheme that was being implemented into this offense, with Matt LaFleur coming in as a new head coach. And, typically with QBs, they tend to do a lot better in year 2 of new systems. And I just think that Aaron Rodgers is going to continue to produce, like I've been saying. And I think, once again, he's going to be a top QB that you're definitely going to want to take when you do your fantasy drafts in the summer and in the early fall. So next on this list, I have the quarterback for the Arizona Cardinals, Kyler Murray. He'll be entering his 3rd season for the Cardinals. Was drafted in the first round, was the number 1 overall pick back in 2019 for the Arizona Cardinals, and definitely had a big jump from his rookie year to his sophomore season. Interceptions were the same with 12, but he increased his touchdown passes by 6, throwing 26 touchdown passes in 2020. Had 378 fantasy points in 2020, increasing his fantasy point total from his rookie season when he had 285 points. And kind of going through some of his good games, and there was a lot of them. There was definitely a lot of them. You look at week 1 against the 49ers, had 26 points. Against the Washington football team, had 32. 21 in week 3. 23 in week 4. And there was really a couple, only 2 weeks where he actually scored in single digits. There was week 17 against the Rams when he was in and out of the lineup that week because he was dealing with an injury. And he just couldn't really get anything going for the Cardinals. Cardinals ended up missing the playoffs, which I thought was kind of a big disappointment, especially because of how good offensively this team was during the year. And it just seemed like there was the team was very inconsistent. It was very inconsistent. They won a lot of big games. They won that marathon against Seattle. But it just seemed like, and obviously they also won week 1 against the 49ers, but it just seemed like they would lay some eggs. Against the Panthers, they laid one. Against the Patriots, they laid an egg, losing that game. Kyler Murray in some games didn't play particularly well, but like I said, it was very, very few. I mean, he really balled out in a lot of these games. Even week 15 against the Eagles, passing for 400 yards, throwing 3 touchdowns, getting 33 points. His highest game that he scored in, and then again, this is just basing off of standard leagues, he had 37 points against the Miami Dolphins back in week 9. But I think Kyler Murray is going to be even better this season. I do. I think that Kyler Murray is going to be healthier this season, and I think that he's going to continue to develop a rapport with DeAndre Hopkins, who they acquired in the offseason from the Houston Texans in that very interesting trade with the Houston Texans and Bill O'Brien. We all know his story with making that trade and questioning why he would do something like that, trading a top wide receiver in DeAndre Hopkins. But the Cardinals have made some interesting moves. They did let Kenyon Drake go. He is now a Las Vegas Raider. And they brought in A.J. Green, a veteran, to go along with DeAndre Hopkins, and they still have Christian Kirk there. But one of the interesting things is we don't know what the status is with Larry Fitzgerald. Is he going to come back? Is he going to continue to play? But I think regardless, Kyler Murray has got a lot of weapons around him, and he's really mobile. Aaron Rodgers is mobile, but Kyler Murray, I think, is going to only get better. And he's definitely a better passer than we give him credit for. And this is a guy that, he could have pursued a career in baseball. And he chose to be a quarterback in the NFL. And he's had a productive first 2 years in the NFL. And I think he's only going to get better. He's got the weapons around him. He's very mobile. Really fast. I mean, I really did not watch a lot of him in college. But, he definitely lights it up when you watch his games. And I think he's primed to have a breakout season. Again, I think he's going to increase his touchdown passes. Now, yeah, you might want to see him try to throw single-digit interceptions, and not everybody's going to do that like Aaron Rodgers, but I think Kyler Murray is somebody, though, that is going to go a lot sooner. Definitely somebody you're going to want to get in between the 4th and 7th round. I think he's going to be one of the top QBs that's going to be off the board. And, especially when you're playing in a 2 QB league like myself, you're going to want to get a really good QB1. And, obviously when it comes to playing 1 QB leagues, typically people are going to want to build the rest of their team out before they get to drafting their quarterback. But I think Kyler Murray is one of those guys that if he's there when you're picking and you feel confident with the first couple of picks that you've made, I think he's somebody you're definitely going to want to get. Because I think he's, like I said, I think he's definitely primed to have a breakout season. Again, another guy that's got the weapons around him. And, they're playing in a tough division, but, the last 2 years now, the Cardinals have had the 49ers number. Now, they did lose that crucial game to the 49ers late in the season against a banged-up 49ers team, and Kyler Murray did not play particularly well. But I think part of that was Kyler Murray wasn't healthy towards the end of the season, and I think next year he's going to be a lot healthier. And like I said, he's mobile, but, is it possible that they could kind of restrict him and not have him run as much because they don't want him to get hurt? Who knows? But either way, I think he's going to be a top QB taken in fantasy, and I think he's going to be even better than he was his previous 2 seasons. And like I said, if he's there, better take him. So I got Kyler Murray as the next QB on this list. So at number 3 on this list, we got the quarterback for the Kansas City Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes. And, listen, the guy can easily be number 1 on this list. But I think he's going to fall a little bit back in the draft. And not saying that he's going to, fall off a cliff, like Max Kellerman would say about Tom Brady for the last 6 or 7 years. Tom Brady goes out there and wins 4 Super Bowls actually, since he said that. But I think Mahomes is still going to have a really good season. I mean, the guy has been amazing ever since he became the full-time starter in Kansas City. His first full season as a starter back in 2018, throwing 50 touchdowns to 12 interceptions. Then played in only 14 games due to the injury that he sustained against the Broncos in 2019. But, 26 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. And then got back on track playing 15 games in 2020 and throwing 38 touchdowns to 6 interceptions. Obviously, his best season was 2018 with 417. 2020 was definitely better than 2019. Had 374 points. And listen, 2019 was probably his worst statistical season since becoming a full-time starter. But hey, he got me a championship in fantasy in 2019, so I will always appreciate that. But in 2020, not so much because he was a part of the heartbreaking loss that I had when the Chiefs beat the Raiders in Las Vegas on that last second touchdown by Patrick Mahomes, throwing it to Travis Kelce in the end zone. And that was the reason why I lost one of my fantasy matchups. So that was kind of depressing. But again, I still think he's going to be a top QB. And the one concern that I have is, let's be honest, that Super Bowl was that was pretty hard to watch. That was very hard to watch. And you could tell early on that it was going to be a long night for the Chiefs. Patrick Mahomes running for his life. Really running for every first down. It didn't look right. The Super Bowl did not look right. But I think he's still going to I think he's going to be a top QB. I think the Chiefs are still going to be a good team. And he's got the weapons. He's got Tyreek Hill. He's got Travis Kelce. And those are two guys that you can definitely rely upon in fantasy as well. Those are high-volume guys, and Mahomes is going to get them the ball. Mahomes has one of the best deep balls in the league, and you saw that a lot last year. You've seen that a lot over the course of his career. And, again, he's somebody that a lot of people are going to have their eyes on and are going to want to take as soon as they can get him. Now, obviously, he's not going to be the first overall pick, but, typically my draft style is, I try to go wide receiver or running back, and then do the same thing with my next pick. Either if I have a running back, I'll go receiver. If I have a receiver, I go running back. And then with my third pick, depending on who's available, if there's another position player that's not a QB that I typically like, I might go in that route. But if a guy like Patrick Mahomes is sitting there and I need a QB, especially like I keep saying, the 2 QB league that I do, I'm going to take Patrick Mahomes. He's definitely still going to be a top QB in this league. But again, the one concern is the film on the Chiefs from that Super Bowl. I think a lot of teams are going to take what the Bucs did in that Super Bowl and they're going to implement that in that scheme when we start playing games in the fall. Now, it's up to the Chiefs to make adjustments because they did not make adjustments in the Super Bowl. But I think the Chiefs are going to figure it out. I really do. I think, listen, Andy Reid is one of the best coaches in the NFL. And I think he's going to figure it out. You got to protect Mahomes. If you can protect Mahomes and the receivers can catch the ball because, there were some crucial drops in the Super Bowl. Travis Kelce was responsible for some of them. If you can eliminate the drops and you can protect Mahomes and you can rebuild that offensive line, because the Chiefs did cut both of their tackles. They did bring in Joe Thuney, the guard from the New England Patriots. If Mahomes is protected and he's got weapons, he's going to be fine and he's going to have another productive season. And he's part of one of the best offenses in the NFL and one of the most exciting offenses to watch. So I don't think Mahomes is going to be the best fantasy QB this year, but he's definitely going to be one of the top ones when the season kicks off in the fall. All right, so the next QB on this list, I have the quarterback for the Los Angeles Chargers, almost said the San Diego Chargers, Justin Herbert, who will be entering his second season in the NFL, being drafted as the 6th overall pick in the 2020 NFL Draft by the Chargers. And he kind of had an interesting start to his career. In Week 2, the starting quarterback for the Chargers was going to be Tyrod Taylor, but there was a little mishap with the medical staff with an injection that Tyrod Taylor got, and it was injected into his lung. And I believe Tyrod Taylor had trouble breathing and stuff, so he could not start, and that's when Herbert started. And he played pretty well in his first game against the Kansas City Chiefs, having 22 points, throwing for 300 yards. It's a very good game. And you know what? Listen, let's put fantasy aside for just a second. The fact that we're going to see Justin Herbert against Patrick Mahomes twice a year now is going to be quite the spectacle. Now, the reason why I have him higher than Patrick Mahomes is just because I think he's going to have that. He's going to have that jump in his second season, and I think he's going to be even better than he was in his rookie season. And he's got the weapons to do it. He's got Austin Eckler as his running back, who hopefully stays healthy this season. That's another guy that I think is going to bounce back and have a productive season. Austin Eckler, he was injured for a little bit during the regular season, and I think he's going to come back and have a better season. Keenan Allen, listen, this guy's been a productive wide receiver throughout his whole career, and I think he just needed another quarterback that can get him the ball consistently, because Phillip Rivers obviously wasn't the quarterback that he was. And, I think a lot of people forgot that Keenan Allen is a productive wide receiver. And, had a great season as well for the Chargers. So I think with that, and then also Mike Williams, the other good wide receiver that the Chargers have, they did lose Hunter Henry in the offseason, but they do bring in Jared Cook. So the Chargers got a lot of weapons, and they also addressed the offensive line. They brought in one of the guards from the Pittsburgh Steelers. They bring in Corey Linsley from Green Bay. So they're going to protect Justin Herbert, and he's going to be able to air it out. Looking at his statistics, threw for over 4,000 yards, 31 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, had 332 points in 15 games this past season. And, look at his numbers. The one stinker that he had was against the Patriots when the Chargers lost 45-0 to the New England Patriots. But I think Herbert he's going to light it up this season. I think he's going to have a better second year. And that's typically what happens with some of these guys. They have an okay first season. Herbert had a great first season, but I think he's going to do even better. And I think he's going to be one of the top QBs taken off the board. And, puts up a lot of yards, likes to air it out. He's a guy that you're definitely going to want to take if he's there. At number 1 on this list, I'm going to go with the quarterback for the Buffalo Bills, Josh Allen. Will be entering his 4th season in the NFL, was the 7th overall pick in the 2018 NFL Draft. And listen, he has improved in every season that he has played since he entered the league back in 2018. When you look at his statistics over the course of his short NFL career so far, in 2018, in 12 games, 11 games that he started, 10 touchdowns to 12 interceptions, not very good, and definitely wasn't on a lot of rosters that year. But in 2019, through 20 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, got the Bills to the playoffs, and had an 80-point jump from his rookie season when it came to fantasy, and this is in standard leagues, went from 208 to 288, and then really broke out in 2020, passing for over 4,500 yards, 37 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, and getting 395 when it comes to fantasy points. And looking at his individual games, there was not one single game that he was not productive. There was a couple of games he played against some good defenses. You look at the Chargers game, he only had 15 points. Only had 15 points against the Chiefs. And also against the Patriots, the first time around, he only had 12. But other than that, Josh Allen was arguably the best QB in fantasy last season. And, passed for 400 yards in 2 games, passing for over 300 yards in a bunch of them, and only having 2 games where he didn't throw a touchdown pass, which is a little surprising. But, he was one of the best QBs in fantasy in 2020, and I think he's going to be the best one in 2021 because when you look at his first 3 years, he's improved in every single season. Now they add Emmanuel Sanders to go along with Stephon Diggs and Cole Beasley and Dawson Knox. They got to have some work to do with the running game. Devin Singletary really hasn't panned out so far, and Zach Moss was just a rookie who they drafted in 2020. But I think Josh Allen is going to be one of, if not the best QB in fantasy. And the Bills are a very explosive offense, and I think they're going to continue that in 2021. So with that concludes the list of the top 5 QBs that I believe are going to be the best QBs when we get to the 2021 NFL season for your fantasy teams. And so with that, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we are going to do our top 5 running backs that I believe are going to be the best running backs for the 2021 NFL season and will be the top 5 running backs in fantasy. So with that, stick around. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Alright, and we're back here on the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast for our second segment. We're going to be talking about the top 5 running backs that I think are going to perform the best in 2021 in real life and in fantasy. So let's get right into it. So with number 5 on the list, I have the running back for the Dallas Cowboys, Ezekiel Elliott, will be entering his 6th season in the NFL. Now, I have Ezekiel Elliott at number 5 because I think, first of all, I think there are better running backs out there that you could definitely get before him, depending on what draft pick you get. But I think Ezekiel Elliott is poised to have a bounce-back season for the Dallas Cowboys. He definitely did not have the season that we're accustomed to seeing in 2020. And I talked about it on the last show, and I think even the show before that. Talked about how Dak Prescott's absence and really the change that the Dallas Cowboys were going through on the offensive line, I think played major roles into why Ezekiel Elliott did not have the season that we are typically accustomed to seeing. Now, looking at the stats for 2020, he was under 1,000 yards with 979 yards, had only 6 touchdowns, and had his career low in fantasy when it comes to standard leagues, 171 points in standard leagues, and had 223 in PPR. Really did not have the season that we were expecting. And I think once Dak Prescott went down with the injury, that really, like I said, that really showed that Ezekiel Elliott was not the same player that he usually is. And he fumbled a lot. Another thing that we're really not accustomed to seeing, he fumbled 6 times in 2020. Now, he fumbled 6 times in 2018 as well. But it just seemed like something was off with Ezekiel Elliott. And, you know, these past couple of years, a lot of people have been talking about the running back position as a whole and how, you know, guys break down a lot faster at this position as opposed to other positions. And, you know, there's some truth behind that, considering that running backs running in between the tackles are always running into guys, and you know it's a tough position. It's one of the toughest positions to play in the NFL, and it's something that does take a toll on your body. And you know we could be seeing that from Ezekiel Elliott. Now, I think he could still be a productive running back. I think that he's still going to be one of the top running backs in the league because Dak Prescott's going to come back. That's going to add to it. I think the Cowboys are going to be one of the top offenses in the league, and I think Ezekiel Elliott is going to be a main factor in that. And you could just tell, looking at his point totals in each individual game in 2020, and this is again based off of standard leagues, you know, after Dak Prescott went down in Week 5 against the New York Giants, Ezekiel Elliott really did not have any productive games. Other than, a couple sprinkled in, he had over 100 yards against the Minnesota Vikings, had, I think, 17 points in that game. He had, last 2 weeks of the season, he had 13 points and 12 points against the Giants in Week 17, but other than that, he was pretty pathetic in the other games that he played in. A lot of single digits, 4 points in Week 6 against the Cardinals when he fumbled twice. He had only 1 point, had 10 carries for 32 yards in the Thanksgiving game against the Washington football team where he only had 1.9. Really was not productive once Dak Prescott went down. And listen, I think you could still take a chance on him because Ezekiel Elliott is a high-volume guy, but I think ultimately there's a lot of guys that are definitely better than Ezekiel Elliott that you can go out and get in the draft, especially, if you do have that first pick, number 1 pick or, 1 through 5, let's say, a lot of these running backs that are on this list are going to get taken before Ezekiel Elliott. So if you have those top 5 picks, you're definitely going to want to get these running backs before Ezekiel Elliott. But I still think he's going to be a top 5 running back. I really do. I think now with a healthy offensive line and Dak Prescott returning, I think Ezekiel Elliott is going to have a bounce-back season. So next on this list, we have the running back for the Cleveland Browns, Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb is entering his 4th season in the NFL. He was the 35th overall pick in the second round of the 2018 NFL Draft by the Cleveland Browns and had really his best season, in my opinion. Even though he did play in 12 games, I think this was probably his best season. It doesn't show it in the stat book, but I think that if he played in a full season, it would have been his best season statistically. And, like I've said on the previous shows, him and Kareem Hunt, I think, are the best 1-2 punch in the NFL when it comes to running backs. So, looking at Nick Chubb's stats through 12 games, he had 1,067 yards rushing, average 5.6 yards per carry, 12 rushing touchdowns, and had 191 points, and this is in standard leagues. Now, over a 16-game stretch, the numbers definitely would have been a lot better. In 2019, he played in 16 games and started in 16 games. He had almost 1,500 yards, had 8 rushing touchdowns, and had 219 points. So he had less touchdowns in 16 games back in 2019 than he did when he played in less games in 2020, and he had 12 rushing touchdowns. This guy is a workhorse, and he does get a majority of the carries compared to Kareem Hunt. They do split, but he gets more of the carries. He's the big 3-down back for them, and I think he's only going to get better. I really do. I think now playing over a 16-game stretch, the Browns address their offensive line issues, and they're only going to get better, I think, in year 2 of Kevin Stefanski's scheme that he's implemented. Baker Mayfield benefited from that, and you could tell the Browns were a different team when Nick Chubb is in the lineup, and he's a guy that they're going to give it to him when they're near the red zone, and I think he's poised to have an even better season, especially now because I think he's going to play all 16 games this season, because he did have that injury in Week 4 against the Cowboys that made him miss a decent amount of games for them. But he was really consistent, and I think that's one of the reasons why I have Nick Chubb higher than some of the other running backs that I might have left off from this top 5 is the guy's really consistent. Not in I don't believe, other than the game where he got injured and the first game of the season against the Ravens, Nick Chubb had double-digit points in pretty much every game that he played in. He was very consistent. He's definitely an automatic at getting you, between 10 and 15 points. Now, typically with running backs, you want them to score more points for you, but I just think what makes Nick Chubb so valuable, and I think more valuable than a lot of these running backs, is the consistency. Like I said, he's going to get you the points that you need. He's going to get you that 10, 15 points that you want. Even on his worst days, he's going to get you that 10, 15 points, and that's something you're going to need. But I think his stock is definitely going to go a lot higher as opposed to what it's been the last 2 years. So Nick Chubb is the next running back that I had on this list. Now we're up to the top 3, and at number 3, I got the running back for the Tennessee Titans, Derrick Henry, who will be entering his 6th season in the NFL. He became the first running back to rush for 2,000 yards since Adrian Peterson did that back in 2012. And Derrick Henry, another guy that's gotten better as his career has gone on. His rushing totals have increased every season since he entered the NFL back in 2016. And yeah, he had 2,027 rushing yards, averaged 5 yards per carry, 5.4 yards per carry, had 17 rushing touchdowns. And like Nick Chubb, definitely a guy that is going to get the ball in the red zone. And, I mean, he's insane. I mean, the guy is a freight train. You don't want to hit him. Has back-to-back NFL rushing titles from 2019 to 2020. I mean, the guy's been incredible now that he's the lead running back. Because, for a while, I think the first 2 years that he was in the league, they had DeMarco Murray as the lead running back, and Derrick Henry was the second running back behind Murray. And yeah, because when you look at 2016, 2017, he only started in 2 games. He did play in 15 games in 2016 and all 16 in 2017, but he only started in 2 games. And his point totals have increased every year in fantasy. This year, in standard leagues, he reached 300 points. 314. And yeah, the guy's a high volume guy. I mean, you look at some of the numbers. He had 38 points against the Texans in their first matchup, had 35 in their second matchup. And there was a couple games where he didn't do that much. Against the Browns, he only had 4.9. Against the Bears, he only had 6.8. So teams have been able to contain him. And that's one thing you do have to worry about is the fact that he was shut down in that playoff game against the Ravens this past season. But I think he's going to put up points. He's a high-volume guy. He's, the focal point of that offense, essentially. And many teams are going to have to game plan and focus their attention on him. But I think he's just too valuable. And, he gets his points. And yeah, you got to worry about some of the clunkers that he might have, because he's not. Listen, he had more points than Nick Chubb, but he's not as consistent as Nick Chubb is. Nick Chubb gets you that 10, 15, like I was mentioning, but sometimes Derrick Henry will have those clunkers, and you're like, what happened? But I think he is above Chubb just because you have those games where he drops 38 to 40 points, and like I said, high-volume guy. He's going to get you those points, and I anticipate that he's going to have another good season. Now, like I said, the only thing to be concerned about is the fact that the Ravens were able to shut down Ryan Tannehill and that offense and Derrick Henry in the playoff game. But I just think that he's so talented. He's so big. It's going to be hard for every single opponent to replicate what the Ravens did in the playoffs. But he's a guy you're definitely going to want to get. Like if he's there, you got a top 3 pick, and let's say the other 2 guys that I'm going to talk about next are taken. I think you got to take Derrick Henry because he is definitely going to have another good season. So the next running back I have on this list is the running back for the Minnesota Vikings, Dalvin Cook. So the next running back I have on this list is the running back for the Minnesota Vikings, Dalvin Cook, who will be entering his 5th season in the NFL, was the 41st pick in the NFL draft back in 2017 when the Vikings took him. His rookie season got cut short because of the torn ACL that he suffered, and he missed a lot of games. In 2018, he missed about 5 games in 2018, and really took some time to get him back to full strength. Usually with ACL injuries, typically the second year is when you're back to full strength. I mean, you could argue players like Adrian Peterson, who came back after his horrific one and when he went on that MVP run back in 2012. Jordy Nelson led the league in touchdown receptions when he came back from his ACL injury back in 2016. But Dalvin Cook, every season, fantasy numbers have improved. He went from 54 to 112 to 239, and then most recently in 2020 to 293. The guy's unbelievable. This past season, he had over 1,500 yards, had 16 rushing touchdowns, which is a career high, and he was just amazing. And only in 14 games this season, he hasn't played a full season since he's been in the NFL. So health is a little bit concerning, but not as concerning as some other guys that you could talk about. But listen, again, like I talk about with the running back position, it's one of those positions where guys are going to be worn down as the season progresses. You're running in between the tackles, you're running into guys constantly. It's a tough position to play, but the guy is insane, and when he plays, he's really consistent. I think he's more consistent than Derrick Henry, which is why I have him a little bit higher. And he is more agile than Derrick Henry is. Derrick Henry's a bulldozer. He's going to try to run you over. Dalvin Cook is more that, kind of typical style running back. Some of the games that he's had in 2020 were insane. I mean, the one game that I'll highlight was in Week 8 against Green Bay. And that was kind of a crazy day for me because I had a situation with COVID where I had to get put in isolation. So I was watching the game on my laptop, and Dalvin Cook was just running all over Green Bay. Had 4 total touchdowns, had 3 rushing touchdowns, had 1 receiving touchdown. Green Bay had no answers for Dalvin Cook in that game. It was a pretty pathetic performance on their defense, on their defense's part, and we saw how Green Bay's defense played in the championship game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So, when you're looking at defenses, this is a quick aside, but, if you're looking at defenses, don't pick up Green Bay's. But if you have Dalvin Cook, make sure that he is a must-start against Green Bay's defense because he carves up Green Bay's defense every time they play. So, other than that game, he had 200 yards rushing against the Detroit Lions the week after. He really is so consistent. There was one game where he had 6 points, and that was against the Carolina Panthers. But other than that, the guy's always scoring in double digits. And this is just the standard leagues, that I go by. But in PPR, definitely is a lot better. Had over 300 points in PPR. The guy's a high-volume guy, and he's definitely somebody that gets involved in the passing game, and he's the focal point of that offense. The offense does kind of go through Dalvin Cook. And I just think that he's, again, high-volume guy, very consistent. I think he is better than Nick Chubb, and he's better than Derrick Henry. He's definitely the second-best running back going into these drafts. And, listen, you got a top 2 pick, and he's there, I would take him. Again, you got to worry about the injuries because typically he does miss a few games. But other than that, you got to take him. I think he's going to have another great season. I think the Vikings are going to be better than they were this past season. And listen, he's the focal point of the offense. And as long as he's running in that backfield, the Vikings offense is going to be successful. And because of that, got Dalvin Cook at number 2 on the list. And at number 1, the running back that I think is going to be the best in 2021 is Christian McCaffrey, the Carolina Panthers running back entering his 5th season in the NFL, was the 8th overall pick in the 2017 NFL draft. And listen, the guy only played 6 games. Guy only played 3 games this past season. And in those 3 games, he had 20-plus points in every single one of those games. In PPR, he had 28 points in Week 1. In Week 2, he had 24 points. And then in Week 9, when he made his brief return against the Kansas City Chiefs, he had 37 points. This is PPR. The guy is the best pass-catching running back in the NFL. Now, he's not a power back like Ezekiel Elliott, like Derrick Henry, like Nick Chubb, like Dalvin Cook, But he's going to, listen, he's a high-volume guy, and especially in PPR, he is going to get so many targets. and he is the focal point of that offense as well. And I'm interested to see what it's going to be like now that Sam Darnold is most likely going to be the starting QB. And I think Sam Darnold is definitely going to have some growing pains in that new offense with the Carolina Panthers. And it's really important for him that he has a security blanket like Christian McCaffrey to check it down to. Now, I think that Christian McCaffrey is going to have a bounce-back season. I think he's going to be healthy this season, and he's going to be the best running back in the NFL. And if you got that first overall pick, you're definitely going to want to take him because the guy, ever since he's come into the NFL, has been so productive, and he's gotten better and better as each season has gone on. Had that huge season back in 2019 when he had over 1,300 yards rushing, 15 rushing touchdowns, had over 1,000 yards receiving and 4 touchdowns. The guy's incredible. Had 355 points in standard leagues and had 471 points in PPR. I mean, that's ridiculous. That is absolutely ridiculous. The guy is somebody you're definitely going to want to have on your team, and he's going to want to prove himself, have a bounce-back season, and be productive next season. But I think that he's going to be the best running back, and I think he's the one you're going to want to take if you have that number 1 overall pick. So that's the list of the top 5 running backs that I have going into the 2021 NFL season. So with that, we're going to take another quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the top 5 wide receivers entering the 2021 NFL season, and the top 5 receivers that I believe are going to be the best when it comes to fantasy. So stick around. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
All right, and we are back here on the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast for segment number 3 of the show. We're going to do the top 5 wide receivers that I think are going to be the best going into 2021, and who are the best receivers are going to be when it comes to fantasy. So let's get right into the list. So at number 5, I got the Kansas City Chiefs wide receiver Tyreek Hill, who will be entering his 6th season in the NFL. He's 27 years old. He was a 5th-round pick in the 2016 NFL draft by the Kansas City Chiefs. And this guy is insane. The speed on this guy is incredible. It's really unmatched. There are very few people that can run as fast as Tyreek Hill. He's one of the fastest players in the league. And in fantasy, was pretty productive this season, playing in 15 games, had over 1,200 yards, 15 receiving touchdowns, had averaged 14.7 yards per reception, and had 241 points in standard leagues. And then when you look at the PPR numbers, he had 328 points in fantasy. So the guy is a high-volume guy. The one thing I worry about him is sometimes he can be boom or bust, and the injuries as well. You know, you look at some of the games, he did have a couple of clunkers. He had the game against the Buffalo Bills. He only had 2.5 points, and this is going based off of standard numbers. In Week 16 against Atlanta, he only had 6.5. Against the Denver Broncos, the second time around, he had 8.8. So there are a couple times where he typically kind of fades out and doesn't produce during certain games. But other than that, pretty consistent numbers, gets at double digits pretty much every time. But then there's like those one or two games where he just goes off, and I'll get into one of those games a little bit later on when we do the last segment of the show, which is the top 5 fantasy performances from an individual player. So Tyreek Hill, this is not the last time he will be mentioned during today's show. But yeah, I mean, he's part of the Kansas City Chiefs. That offense is lethal. And again, I talked about it in the last segment, or the segment before that with Patrick Mahomes. The offense got shut down in the Super Bowl, and that's very concerning. And Tyreek Hill definitely takes away a lot of attention from other guys on the Kansas City Chiefs. And he's definitely one of those guys you got to look out for because he could blow right by you. And, I think he's going to be one of the best receivers in the league this upcoming season again, top 5, But I think there's better receivers out there that are more consistent. And, also Tyreek Hill has gotten injured over the past couple of seasons. He did play 16 games in 2018. He did miss 1 game in 2020. He missed 4 games in 2019, only playing in 12 games. But, other than that, I think he's just, if he's there, you got to get him. But, I think he's kind of like an early second-round pick. But, like I said, I think there's better receivers out there that you can definitely get before him. And with that, we are going to move on in this list. So at number 4, I have the wide receiver for the New Orleans Saints, Michael Thomas, who will be entering his 6th season in the NFL. He was a second-round pick back in the 2016 NFL draft by the New Orleans Saints. Now, Michael Thomas did not have a good season last year. He only had 1 touchdown, which was in the postseason. He started in 5 games, played in 7. Really, just between the injuries and the suspension, Michael Thomas did not have a productive season, only putting up 43 points in standard leagues, and then in PPR, only 83. Now, that's a huge jump from standard leagues because now you're counting points per reception. So again, he's a very high-volume guy. Now, the one thing that I'm interested in is who the quarterback is going to be for the New Orleans Saints. We have Jameis Winston, we have Taysom Hill. The Saints paid both of these guys. They're bringing these guys back. Who's going to be the starter for the Saints when we get into September? So it's going to be interesting to see. I think Michael Thomas is going to have a bounce-back season. And I think because he's a very high-volume guy and the Saints use him a lot, he's going to get a lot of targets. And I think he's going to be more consistent than Tyreek Hill is. I mean, when you look at the games that he played in, really didn't do that much. I mean, the most points he had was in the Week 13 contest against the Atlanta Falcons. He had 10.5 points, and this is going based off of standard leagues. Not really that impressive this season, but when you think about it, you go back to 2019 when he had his historic season. He had 225 fantasy points when it comes to standard leagues, and when it came to PPR, he had 374. I mean, this guy put up over 1,700 yards, 9 touchdowns, averaged 9.3 yards per target, and 11.6 yards per reception. The guy was amazing in 2019. Now, it's going to be different because you're not going to have Drew Brees there, but I think because Michael Thomas is a high-volume guy and he's a dependable wide receiver when he's healthy, I think really the quarterback position is not that major of a concern, but it's definitely something you got to think about. So he's definitely going to kind of fall off a little bit. He's not going to be the same as he was in 2019. I think he's going to have a much better season than 2020. He's going to be another one of those guys that you want to see bounce back. I mean, when you look at the statistics from 2019, I mean, he was incredible. I mean, he had 40 points in 1 game. He had 20-plus points in a dozen of these games. Had 30 points in a couple games as well. I mean, he was incredible in 2019. And I think it's hard to imagine the guy that's this talented is not going to bounce back. And I think he's going to be one of the top wide receivers taken in the draft. He's somebody that's definitely, maybe just missed the top 10. But, I think I'd definitely see him like Tyreek Hill being an early second-round pick as well. I mean, I think he still definitely has the number 1 wide receiver pedigree. And I think that he's somebody that, listen, if he's there and you've taken a running back and you want to take him. Because I think he's going to have a bounce-back season. Now, it's just interesting because of all the drama that kind of ensued with the Saints last season with him. Could the Saints possibly trade him? Could they move off from him? I don't know. I mean, there hasn't really been any rumors regarding that. I mean, I think the Saints want to keep him around, especially because they lost Emmanuel Sanders, they lost Jared Cook. They have a change at quarterback. So, the Saints are going to be a little bit of a different team going into next season, but I think with Michael Thomas, he's probably going to stay, and, they kind of need him because who knows what the Saints are going to look like next year. They're definitely going to take a step back. They're not going to be as productive as they were in years past, but I think they're still going to be a decent team, and they're definitely going to put up a fight in this NFC South. But you know what? Like I said, I think Michael Thomas will have a bounce-back season. I think he's going to be one of the top wide receivers in the fantasy drafts that you're doing whether it's late summer, early fall. And like I said, I think he's going to have a bounce-back season, and he's going to produce for whoever he is drafted by. All right, and with number 3 on this list, we got the Buffalo Bills wide receiver Stephon Diggs, who will be entering his 7th season in the NFL. Was a 5th-round pick back in 2015 by the Minnesota Vikings. Concluded his first season with the Buffalo Bills, and it was a successful one. He had career highs in pretty much every statistic, had the most targets he's ever had the most receptions he's ever had in a season, had the most receiving yards, not receiving touchdowns. The most receiving touchdowns he's ever had in a single season was back in 2018 with 9, but he was close to that. He had 8 in 2020 and had 201 points. This is in standard leagues, and then in PPR he had 328. And listen, that he was a very important guy, a very key component to the Bills' really good season and getting the Bills to a AFC Championship game. The Bills, listen, like I talked about with Josh Allen, he improved every season statistically since he entered the league, and Stephon Diggs really helped him out in 2020. The Bills really needed a number 1 wide receiver. They had some good wide receivers with adding John Brown and Cole Beasley, but they really needed like that number 1 wide receiver that you can really depend upon. And Stephon Diggs became that guy. And that was a trade that kind of worked out for both the Buffalo Bills and the Minnesota Vikings. The Vikings were able to draft Justin Jefferson, and he turned out to be fantastic, having a great rookie season. And Stephon Diggs had a pretty successful season with the Buffalo Bills. And I think he's only going to get better. I think that he's going to continue to get a lot of targets from Josh Allen. And like I said in the first segment, Josh Allen's going to be a top QB when it comes to fantasy. And I think the main reason for that, or one of the main reasons for that, is because of Stephon Diggs. And you kind of look through a lot of his games. Some games he kind of faded out a little bit. He had 4.8 against the Jets in the second matchup that they had. He had 3.9 points against the Chargers. His best game came against the Patriots in Week 16 when he had 3 touchdowns, had 11 targets, 9 receptions for 145 yards. Had 32 points, and this is in standard leagues. But, again, big deep ball guy that can go up and get those 50-50 balls. He's definitely going to have his way next season. And I anticipate that he is going to continue to be Josh Allen's top target. He's going to get a lot of targets. And I just think that, there's a lot less question marks with Stephon Diggs as opposed to Michael Thomas. And, sometimes Tyreek Hill could be boom or bust. I think Stephon Diggs is a little bit more consistent than Tyreek Hill. And there's a lot less question marks at the quarterback position for the Buffalo Bills. Now, the Buffalo Bills brought in Mitchell Trubisky. So anything is possible. Josh Allen maybe could get hurt or something. Or Josh Allen could get benched and Mitchell Trubisky could start. I am completely kidding. That is not going to happen. Injury could happen to Josh Allen, but Mitchell Trubisky hopefully is not starting for the Buffalo Bills at all this season. But anyways, Stephon Diggs, number 3 on this list. All right, so coming in at number 2 on this list, we have the wide receiver for the Arizona Cardinals, DeAndre Hopkins, who just completed his first season with the Arizona Cardinals, entering his 8th season in the NFL, was the 27th overall pick back in the 2013 NFL draft by the Houston Texans. And, he's been great. The guy has only missed 2 games in his NFL career. He has started pretty much every game. The guy does not miss games. And I think that's something that's very important when it comes to fantasy, is you want to have guys that are always playing. Because I know in the past, for me, I've had guys that get injured, and especially this past season with Nick Chubb missing a lot of games, and I didn't have a lot of depth at the running back position. When your stars go down, especially in fantasy, it's tough. It's tough because you really gotta try to piece things together for multiple weeks until your stars come back. And DeAndre Hopkins is one of those guys that he always plays, is never hurt, and he's reliable, and definitely took a little bit of a step back in terms of production. Still had a pretty good season. Had over 1,400 yards, had 6 receiving touchdowns, which was kind of low compared to the last couple seasons back in Houston. I mean, Kyler Murray is definitely the first or second best QB he's played with. I mean, the top 2 is obviously Deshaun Watson and Kyler Murray. You could flip-flop those 2 however you want to. But other than that, he played with guys like Brian Hoyer and Matt Schaub and TJ Yates and Brandon Weeden and Tom Savage. This guy was able to produce with whatever QB was starting for the Texans. And now he's with Kyler Murray, and I think, like I talked about in the first segment, Kyler Murray I think is going to be even better than he was this past season. So I think because of that, they're going to develop more of a chemistry, him and DeAndre Hopkins, and I think Hopkins is going to have a much better production, a lot more touchdowns than he did in 2020. He's definitely going to have, I'm going to say he's going to have double-digit touchdowns this season. I don't want to say what specific number, but I think that he's, usually, like I said, usually when it comes to the second season in a new system, that's when the players start to, kind of understand the system a lot better and they produce better. So I think, I'm going to go along with that logic and say that DeAndre Hopkins is going to have a much better season in 2021. And because of that, I think, like I said, you're going to see more touchdown receptions from him. I think I'm going to anticipate that Kyler Murray is going to stay healthy. They're going to try to protect him. And, yeah. So DeAndre Hopkins, looking at his numbers in 2020, fantasy-wise, he had 172 points in standard leagues, had 287 in PPR. And looking at some of the games, he did have a few clunkers. 3 points against the Dolphins, had 4 against the Carolina Panthers, had 4.8 against the 49ers, had 3.5 against the Rams the second time around. That was the season finale. So, yeah, a few clunkers in there. Didn't necessarily have the season that you're accustomed to seeing him have in fantasy. Didn't have a single game that went over 30 points. But I think it's going to be different. The last couple of games, Kyler Murray was injured, and that had a lot to do with that as well. And I think Hopkins was injured as well for a little bit of the season. He was kind of banged up. So hopefully next season, everybody's healthy, and they get back to what they usually do as a duo. And, I think that, with the additions that the Cardinals made on offense, bringing in A.J. Green, they still got Christian Kirk there, Chase Edmonds at running back. The Cardinals are going to have a really good offense. Now, DeAndre Hopkins is going to get a lot of attention, and of course he is because he's one of the best receivers in the league. But I think, like I said, the relationship between him and Kyler Murray is going to be the key, and I think they're going to get things straightened out. And I think because of that, he's going to have a much better season, and he's going to be one of those top receivers that you're going to want to take. Definitely going to be a top 3 wide receiver when it comes to fantasy this year, at least in my opinion. So, DeAndre Hopkins at number 2 on this list. And number 1 on this list, we got the wide receiver for the Green Bay Packers, Davante Adams, entering his 8th season in the NFL in 2021, was the second-round pick for Green Bay back in 2014, and, listen, had his best season, I think. 18 receiving touchdowns, 243 points when it came to standard leagues, and then in PPR, had 358 points. caught Aaron Rodgers' 400th touchdown pass, and this was in 14 games this season, so you wonder what he would have done if he played in every game. One of the concerns you have with Davante Adams is he's missed games over the past couple seasons, but when he plays, he's super productive. Very high-volume guy. Aaron Rodgers' top target, is very consistent in his production. He missed week 3 through 5. Now, the Packers had a bye week in between that and 2020. Came back against the Bucs, only had 6 points. But once he started getting rolling, he was unstoppable. The week after that, against the Houston Texans, had 196 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. Had 31 points in that game. Again, this is in standard leagues. He was phenomenal. He was really phenomenal this season. And then, of course, his best game of the season came against, in terms of fantasy, it came against the Tennessee Titans in Week 16. He had 142 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns, had 32 points, and that's in standard leagues. And then in PPR, he had 43 points. He was insane, and I anticipate he's going to have another great season for the Packers. Aaron Rodgers is going to need him. If the Packers want to get back to where they were the last 2 years with the NFC Championship game appearances, and if they want to get it done this season and actually win a championship, Davante Adams is going to be a key component of that. And I anticipate he's going to have another great season. He's got to stay healthy. And the Packers are really happy to have him because, listen, first couple of seasons, it didn't look like it was going to work out, but he really transformed himself into the best receiver in the NFL right now. He's probably the best route runner, and, like I said, he's going to get a lot of targets this season. He's the top target in Green Bay, and he's definitely the best receiver when it comes to fantasy. So if he's there, got to take him. Obviously you're going to want to value, I think, running backs over receivers, but, especially in PPR, you're going to want to get Davante Adams because Aaron Rodgers is going to get the ball to him constantly. So with that is the top 5 receivers that I think are going to be the best entering the 2021 NFL season when it comes to fantasy. So with that, we're going to take another quick break. When we come back, we are going to talk about the top 5 best fantasy performances by individual players, and that will close out the show. So with that, we'll take a break. So stick around. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast.
Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? The GSMC College Football Podcast is your ticket to all things college football. Join us as we talk college football from the national championship, the college rivalries, the bowl game, to the Heisman Trophy. To which conference is the best? We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, the Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between. Download the GSMC College Football Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
All right, and we are back here on the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. With the last segment for today's show, we're going to talk about the top 5 best performances for the 2020 season. Who had breakout games? Who had the best games when it came to fantasy in 2020? So let's get right into it. A lot of the players that you're going to see on here actually made the previous lists that I had during today's show. It could be a running back, it could be a wide receiver, whatever. Let's get right into it. So, with number 5 on this list, we had Davante Adams, Week 7 against the Houston Texans, where he had 13 receptions, 196 yards, 2 touchdowns, and this is based off of PPR stats, so he had 44.6 points. Now, the Packers were coming off a really tough loss against Tampa Bay. Davante Adams missed 2 games prior to Green Bay playing Tampa Bay, and he was trying to get back into it. He didn't seem right in the game against Tampa Bay. In large part, it had to do with the fact that the Bucs just absolutely destroyed the Packers in that game, in that contest in Week 6. And, sometimes when guys come back from injury, it kind of takes them a game or two to kind of get themselves back into the groove of things. So the Packers were really deflated after this 38-10 blowout loss to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So they go up against the Houston Texans, who really had one of the worst pass defenses in the league, and they really had to get something going, and they did that. Davante Adams, balled out, had 2 touchdowns, and, listen, when you're Aaron Rodgers' top target, he's going to look for you. And, listen, Davante Adams, like I talked about in the previous segment, a lot of people were talking about how, he might get cut by Green Bay. Green Bay might let him go, and, Green Bay kept him around, and, you know what, he's really panned out. And especially like in this game against the Texans, like I said, the Texans have had a terrible defense this season, horrible. So obviously Davante Adams, not only is a number 1 wide receiver when it comes to fantasy, he was a must start regardless. The Texans defense was so bad, they could not stop him at all. And listen, hopefully I get Davante Adams again, because I want to have him on my team and do things like this. And Green Bay is lucky to have him, like I said in the last segment. Aaron Rodgers is very fortunate to have a receiver like this. And, especially in fantasy, you want to have a receiver that is going to have performances like this, because it definitely helps out your team in the long run. So, Week 7 against the Houston Texans, Davante Adams, that's number 5 on this list. So, the next individual performance in fantasy that I thought was the best on this list was Dalvin Cook. 30 rushing attempts for 163 yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 receptions for 63 yards, and 1 receiving touchdown, had 48.6 points. This is based off of PPR. And listen, I'll go into more specifics again. So, like I said, this was during the Week 8 matchup against the Packers in Lambeau Field. No fans were there. Dalvin Cook absolutely destroyed the Packers in this game. And I remember watching it because, like I mentioned before, I had a COVID incident. I got put in isolation. So, my football Sunday kind of took a hit. Wasn't able to watch every game like I wanted to. And, I'm an Aaron Rodgers fan, so I want the Packers to do good. I want Aaron Rodgers to get the second Super Bowl. And Dalvin Cook just absolutely destroyed the Packers in this game. I'm watching the game on my laptop. And, I had a bunch of stuff going on that day, like I mentioned, being thrown out of my dorm room and being put in another room to isolate because of the pandemic, because of a COVID incident that I got myself involved with. So, I had that along with the fact that Dalvin Cook was absolutely carving up the Packers defense that day. And it was pretty pathetic. It was a pretty pathetic performance by the Packers defense. And, that's, again, like I said in the Dalvin Cook, when I was talking about the top 5 running backs that I think are going to be top 5 running backs in 2021 when it comes to fantasy, Dalvin Cook just absolutely destroys the Packers every time he plays them, basically. And he's the focal point of that offense. And that offense runs through Dalvin Cook. And the Packers just couldn't tackle in that game. They just could not tackle in that game. I don't know why. I guess they forgot to. But this is why Dalvin Cook is a monster, because, he just sucks the life out of some of these teams. And, he could put up performances like this, which makes him a fantasy essential, And he's definitely going to be, like I said, he's going to be one of the top running backs in the NFL once again. And it's because of individual performances like that. Especially going to Lambeau and doing that. Now, you could argue, well, there was no fans and all that. But, the other thing is the Packers' running defense is terrible. The run defense is terrible. It's not good. It hasn't been good. But, this just shows you why Dalvin Cook is a top running back in fantasy. Because of game, like I said, because of games like this. and he's definitely going to have a game like that again when we get into next season, So I got Dalvin Cook's performance against the Packers at number 4 on this list. So coming at number 3 on this list, we got Tyler Lockett's 53-point performance in Week 7 against the Cardinals on Sunday Night Football. He had 15 receptions for 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. This was an insane performance, and this came off after I traded him in my league that I do with my friends from home. I traded him, and I think this was the week after I traded him. This is when this performance happened. I mean, he was insane. The Cardinals don't have a typically good pass defense, and Tyler Lockett was able to exploit that, and he was amazing in this game. This was one of the games, though, this was a classic game between the Cardinals and the Seahawks. This game went into overtime. You had the big DK Metcalf play, when Russell Wilson threw an interception at the goal line and Budda Baker's running it back and Metcalf tackles him down right before he gets to the end zone. And then the Cardinals didn't even score on that drive. But Tyler Lockett was huge in that game. He was, the first play from scrimmage, it was like a 40-yard pass, Russell Wilson threw to him. So he had a great game. That was really one of the few games that he really did anything. Other than that, Tyler Lockett really didn't do much, other than this game. But, he's one of those guys that, sometimes he just goes off in games, and then other times he just, does nothing. He's very inconsistent, but this was one of the games that he was really good in. And, definitely a guy that, you could get in the later rounds, and he could be that number 2 flex option, But, he's definitely going to maybe, I don't think he's going to have a 53-point performance again, but, he's definitely going to have good performances, since he's playing against the Cardinals again this season, because the Seahawks play the Cardinals twice a year. And, who knows? Maybe he can have that performance again. Again, I don't think it's going to be 53 points. But, again, the Cardinals do have not a very good pass defense. So Tyler Lockett, can definitely have a game that's not quite like that, but could be similar to that. So with that, he comes in at number 3 on this list. So at number 2 on this list, we have Alvin Kamara's performance in Week 16 versus the Minnesota Vikings, where he had 22 rushing attempts, 155 yards, 6 touchdowns, 3 receptions for only 17 yards, and he had 56 points. Now, listen, if you were in a fantasy championship that week, you must have been so happy when Alvin Kamara did this. And listen, going into this game, the Minnesota Vikings were missing both of their starting linebackers. So their linebackers got absolutely shredded in this game. They were pretty pathetic. The defense was pretty pathetic. On both sides, really. This game was like a 56 to 30 something game. It was a crazy game. And Alvin Kamara had one of his best games as a pro. He really did. And I don't think he's gonna ever do. I don't think he'll ever do that again in a game. 6 touchdowns is pretty crazy. That was an NFL record. And it was one of the greatest performances in fantasy football history. 6 touchdowns, which tied an NFL record. And, it was crazy that, he was able to do that. Because, listen, that's, like I said, that's a historic performance. And, not many players can say they do that. And, this also came a few weeks before he got COVID and he missed the, he got COVID the week after, or he was quarantined the week after. So he missed Week 17, but he was able to come back for the playoff game, I believe, So the fact that he was able to do that in this game was incredible. And again, a lot of people were definitely happy that he did that because, it probably won you a fantasy championship. It didn't win me a fantasy championship because I didn't have Kamara in any of my leagues. But, listen, if you had Alvin Kamara that week, God bless you. You must have been so happy. Good for you. Unfortunately, I wasn't one of those people that had Alvin Kamara in fantasy. But you know what? Again, that was more on the Vikings just having a depleted defense and just letting Alvin Kamara do whatever he wanted, against him and let him have his way. And, typically with Drew Brees, Drew Brees was going to check it down to him a lot. I mean, you saw it a lot. I mean, he had a lot of flashy plays earlier in the season as well. Drew Brees checking it down to him. But, it was mostly him on the ground, though. And with Alvin Kamara, he's one of those guys that he isn't a big back like Derrick Henry and some of the other guys in the NFL and some of the guys that I mentioned in the earlier segment. But he's going to put up points, and he is stronger than I think people give him credit for. Because, I mean, there are times he does run over people. There is definitely times he does run all over people. But, when it benefits him that he's one of the best receiving running backs in the NFL. Now, one of the interesting things is I did not have him on the top 5 running backs list, and that was mostly because of the transition that the Saints are kind of going through right now with Taysom Hill and Jameis Winston fighting over that starting QB role. So that's why I kind of left him off the list, and I think he's going to kind of take a step back in production because there's some uncertainty with that. But listen, he had a great performance Week 16 against the Vikings. Now, like I said, is he ever going to do something like that again? Probably not. But again, who knows? But again, one of the best fantasy performances you'll probably ever see. And like I said about 1 million times already, if you had him, he definitely should have won you your fantasy championship. So Alvin Kamara comes at number 2 on this list. So this is kind of an honorable mention because I originally had this on my list, but I decided to take it off. Now, I didn't have it at number 1, obviously, but I had it on the list and then I kind of replaced it with somebody else. And that was when Derrick Henry went for 22 rushing attempts, had 212 yards, 2 touchdowns, and then with receiving stats, he had 2 receptions, 52 yards, had 40 points against the Houston Texans. I mean, he was incredible in this game. This is the game that the Texans won, I think, 37-29 in overtime or something like that. Or no, sorry, it was 40. It was 42-36, I think, was the final score in that game. That game was a marathon from the start. Derrick Henry had 2 big runs in that game, and then the Titans got the ball in overtime, and Ryan Tannehill threw him a pass, and he took it all the way down into the red zone, and then he took a direct snap and scored the game-winning touchdown in that game. He was incredible in that game. And again, it's a credit to how bad the Texans' defense really is. I mean, like I talked about with the Devontae Adams segment. Well, not the Devontae Adams segment, but the Devontae Adams game that I had on this list. I mean, the Texans just were so bad on defense this year, and they just could not stop Derrick Henry. They couldn't stop him in the Week 17 matchup either, because these two teams did play again. But this game was just amazing. This was one of the best games of the season, really. And listen, it's a credit to Derrick Henry and a discredit to the Texans defense because they had no answers for Derrick Henry whatsoever. They could not stop him at all. 212 yards rushing. I mean, they just could not stop him. No matter what they did, they just could not stop him. They couldn't make adjustments. And, again, this is all like PPR stats as well. But, listen, he's probably going to do it to them again because the Texans are really bad. And they're going to be a lot worse this year than they were last year. And they went 4-12 last year. So that's kind of an honorable mention, is the Week 6 matchup Derrick Henry had with the Houston Texans. All right, so with that, we get to number 1 on this list. And number 1 on this list is Tyreek Hill's 57-point game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in Week 12, where he had 13 receptions for 269 yards and 3 touchdowns. He was amazing in that game, particularly in the first quarter, where he had over 200 yards in the first quarter. I mean, the Bucs had no answers for Tyreek Hill in this game. and he just blew right by him. They could not stop him. He was throwing up the deuces. He was absolutely insane in this game. And I just remember, my friend who ended up winning our league was versing my other friend, and just seeing, Tyreek Hill putting up, I think he had 30 points in the first quarter already. And I'm like, how did that happen? How did that happen? I'm sitting there watching the game, and I'm just like, how are the Bucs not making any adjustments? How are you not able to stop him? You're letting him go right by you. You got to understand, though, the Chiefs had one of the best offenses in the league, and they've had one of the best offenses in the league last couple seasons. But, that was insane. That was the best performance this season. Now, it was very different when we got to the Super Bowl because Tyreek Hill really did not repeat that. I thought he was going to have... he wasn't going to have the game he was going to have in Week 12 against the Bucs, but I thought he was going to have one or two plays where he was going to blow right past him. And the Bucs did not let him do that. Did not let him do that at all. He really did nothing that whole game. There was a play or two, he showed a flash, but he never really did anything in the Super Bowl. But this game, 200 yards in the first quarter. That was crazy. Listen, credit to the Bucs for being able to make adjustments when we got to the Super Bowl and we got to see these two teams play each other again. But man, that's the best performance in fantasy this past season. The Alvin Kamara 6-touchdown game comes very close. It was definitely basically a tie between the two, but that was crazy. Watching the Chiefs offense is, very special. And listen, if you get Tyreek Hill, is he going to do something like that again? Again, same thing with Alvin Kamara. Probably not. He's probably not going to do that again. But you never know. You never know. So, kind of do a recap of this list here. So, at number 5, we had the Week 7 matchup with the Texans for Devontae Adams. He put up 44 points. The 4th spot on this list, we had Dalvin Cook in the Week 8 matchup against the Packers, putting up 48 points. We had the Week 7 matchup that Tyler Lockett had with the Arizona Cardinals, getting 200 yards, 53 points, 3 touchdowns. Number 2 on this list, we had Alvin Kamara in his Week 16 matchup with the Minnesota Vikings on Christmas, when he had 6 touchdowns, 56 points, and like I said, you got a nice Christmas gift if you were in your fantasy championship and he helped you win. So Alvin Kamara was that too. The honorable mention was Derrick Henry's Week 6 matchup against the Houston Texans with 212 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns, 40 points in that game. And then number 1, we had Tyreek Hill, who had a 57-point game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, putting up over 200 yards in the first quarter, 269 receiving yards, and 3 touchdowns. And those were crucial because the Bucs did try to climb back into that game and fell short, but in the end they won the Super Bowl. So yeah, those were the top 5 fantasy performances of 2020, and with the honorable mention as well, the Derrick Henry honorable mention. So with that is all the time that we have for this show. Thank you for listening to it, and make sure to subscribe to all of our social media platforms on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Make sure to write a nice review. We greatly appreciate it. And yeah, that's all we got. So, I'm Kenneth Gruenfelder signing off from the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Have a good day, and we'll see you next time.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.goldenstatemedia.com. GSMCpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.